Welcome back to the deep dive. If you're joining us today, you're probably someone who's, deeply curious about how the world actually works, but maybe you want to avoid the total overwhelm of today's information overload.
Right. There's just a lot of shouting out there right now.
Exactly. So today, our mission is to examine the water we swim in. We are jumping into a massive 2025 book by Sven Beckert. It's called Capitalism, A Global History.
And this is such a fascinating source because, it asks us to strip away all the modern political shouting matches.
Right, like put all that aside.
Yeah, just put it aside and look at capitalism the way a historian would look at, the Stone Age or medieval Europe.
Like an alien studying us.
Basically, yeah, viewing it as this bizarre, totally human-made hyperobject that has radically rewired humanity over the last 1,000 years.
So to truly understand how the modern world works, we have to travel back in time to denaturalize what feels completely normal to us today. Because to us, buying and selling just feels like a law of physics.
It does. It just feels like breathing.
Right. But to prove how blind we are to our own economic system, we need to look at how genuinely shocking capitalist behavior was to people who lived before it became the norm. So let's go to Boston. The year is 1639.
Ah, yes. The trial of Robert Keayne.
Yes, Robert Keayne. He was this Puritan merchant, and he gets taken to court, publicly humiliated, and he narrowly escapes being excommunicated from his church.
Which in 1639 Boston is a big deal.
A massive deal. And he gets hit with a fine of 200 pounds. Now, for context, that was the equivalent of 2,857 days of wages for a skilled worker back then.
It's a ruinous amount of money.
Utterly ruinous. And what was his grand crime? He bought goods as cheap as he could, and he sold them as dear as he could.
He turned a profit.
He turned a profit, which is just good business today. But back then, he had to confess to the, quote, false principle of taking advantage of another's ignorance or necessity.
Because it was a sin. It was considered literally evil by his peers.
Which is wild. It makes me think of that fish trying to understand water analogy. The book mentions a quote from Pierre Bourdieu, the sociologist, who said, a successful institution is forgotten.
Mm-hmm.
We only see one tiny movie frame, but we completely miss the whole plot of the film.
What's fascinating here is what Keayne actually did next. Because he didn't just quietly pay the fine and slink away.
Right. He wrote a massive defense, didn't he?
He did. He wrote this massive will defending his actions. He argued that his, covetous wealth building actually served his community.
Which perfectly prefigures Adam Smith's whole invisible hand theory.
Exactly. But in 1639, this single-minded pursuit of profit was a radical, almost sacrilegious departure from social norms.
But wait. If this behavior was considered literal evil by his community, how did Keayne's mindset eventually conquer the globe?
Well, because it produced undeniable material results. And the book highlights two diametrically opposed yet entirely factual stories about what the system actually accomplished.
Okay, let's unpack this, because the numbers in the source are pretty mind-blowing.
They really are. On one hand, it's a sheer miracle of human productivity. Global life expectancy went from 26 years in 1820 to 72 years in 2020.
Wow.
And look at basic survival. In 1830, a French worker had to work 15 hours just to put bread on the table.
Yeah.
By 1970, 1 hour and 10 minutes.
That is an insane leap in efficiency. But there is a second story.
Right, the parallel reality. On the other hand, it's a story of brutal exploitation. The transatlantic slave trade, unprecedented ecological assault, violent displacement.
And the authors make it very clear we aren't taking sides here. Historically, Karl Marx and the Chinese Communist Party openly praised capitalism's emancipatory, productive potential.
Right, while conservative critics have historically attacked it for destroying traditional social bonds.
So it's not a left-right thing. The book calls it a many-headed hydra. But if it's this complex, how does Beckert actually define it? Because it can't just be people trading things.
No, definitely not.
Yeah.
Markets and trade have existed since antiquity. The Romans had markets.
Right.
Capitalism is distinct. It is the ceaseless accumulation of privately controlled capital.
Ceaseless accumulation.
Yeah, where wealth is instantly redeployed to make more wealth. It requires the commodification of absolutely everything. Inputs, outputs, and crucially, human labor. Everything gets a price tag.
Wait, I have to jump in here, though. Doesn't modern capitalism pride itself on the idea of the free market? Like getting the government out of the way?
That is the big myth we tell ourselves. A major revelation from the source is that capitalism is actually an extraordinarily statist form of economic life.
Statist, like relying on the government.
Completely. It cannot exist without a powerful state to enforce property rights, allocate resources, and manage economic rules. You need armies, you need courts to enforce contracts across oceans. It is fundamentally a political economy.
Okay, so if it's this complex fusion of state power, commodification, and ceaseless accumulation, where did it come from? Because the standard textbook says, a couple of guys in England invented the steam engine and boom, capitalism.
Yeah, but the book argues strongly against that. Searching for a single geographic origin point is totally futile. It calls that Eurocentric Victor's history.
Victor's history.
Right. Instead, the author argues capitalism was born global.
Here's where it gets really interesting for me. The book completely smashes the European myth and takes us to the port of Aden in Yemen in the year 1150.
Hundreds of years before European industrialization.
Exactly. This city was the beating heart of Indian Ocean trade, connecting Asia, Africa, Arabia, and Europe.
And we have actual historical accounts of this. The scholar Ibn Battuta visited in 1330, and he just marveled at the enormous wealth of Aden's merchants.
He wrote about single men owning massive fleets of ships by themselves, right?
Yeah, because of the vast capital at their disposal. Aden was this literal and figurative island of capital.
It makes me think of the invention of the internet.
Oh, how so?
Well, the birth of capitalism wasn't like a lone genius inventing a machine in a garage in England. If you have one computer, it's just a calculator. The power doesn't live in a single computer.
Right, it's the network.
Exactly. The power lived entirely in the network and the connections between the nodes. Aden was a node routing value from one place to another.
That is a perfect analogy. And it validates why the author says studying French capitalism or American capitalism in total isolation just fails.
Because it's a global network.
Right. Capitalist success in one part of the world was always deeply connected to so-called failures or exploitations in another part. You can't separate the nodes.
Okay, but to maintain this global network of accumulation, it couldn't just rely on voluntary trading forever, right? It had to devour things outside the market to survive.
And this is a huge misunderstanding people have. Seeing capitalism as an exclusively market-based society misses how it actually works.
Oh, so?
It relies on what the economist Joseph Schumpeter called props made of extra-capitalist materials.
Extra-capitalist, so things that aren't inherently part of the market.
Right. To fuel the revolution, it required the colonization of new spheres. The countryside, traditional family structures.
Like relying on unpaid domestic labor to subsidize factory workers.
Exactly that. And unpriced ecological resources. Taking sugar, indigo, and cotton from the earth for free. It developed this incredibly predatory relationship to non-human nature.
Which has led us to what the book calls the Capitalocene.
Yes.
But wait, let me push back on this a bit. Doesn't the traditional history of capitalism focus heavily on, the realization of human freedom? Private property, peaceful contracts between free people?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the source material paints a much darker parallel reality.
Darker in what way?
Against long odds and massive resistance from commoners, capitalism required astounding coercion. It wasn't just productivity gains, it was massive appropriations. Stealing land, stealing labor, lives, and technical knowledge.
So it wasn't just a bunch of voluntary handshakes?
Not at all. And a key point in the book is that the commodification of labor was perfectly compatible with, and often entirely relied upon, brutal systems like slavery.
Because the network didn't care if the labor was free or enslaved, as long as it fueled the ceaseless accumulation.
Right. The input node just needed to provide the cotton for the output node.
Man. So what does this all mean for you listening right now? We've covered a lot of ground. From a Boston courtroom in 1639 to fleets of ships in Yemen to the hidden props of nature and society.
I think the main takeaway is that capitalism isn't a natural law of physics.
Right.
It is a many-headed hydra, a deeply human-made process that is still happening every single day. And because it's historically contingent, it means the future is entirely open-ended.
It's not locked in stone.
Exactly. The book notes this incredible example. In the 1790s, enslaved sugar workers in Saint-Domingue, who were impoverished, illiterate, and facing the absolute worst of this global system.
The Haitian Revolution, right?
Yes. They managed to topple the heavily defended institution of slavery there. The point is, if they could do that, humans today still have the agency to design a better, more sustainable world.
We aren't just subjects to the system.
No, we really aren't.
Thank you so much for breaking this down. And for you, our listener, thanks for joining us on this deep dive. But before you go, I want to leave you with one final provocative thought to chew on today.
Well, lay it on us.
Well, the book defines capitalism by its constant need to redraw boundaries, right? Constantly subsuming outside non-market spheres to keep accumulating. Historically, that was nature or rural land.
Yeah, pulling it all into the market.
Right. Today, it's our personal data, our attention spans. But as capitalism becomes this absolute planetary force, what happens when the ceaseless machine finally runs out of outside space to consume?
Oh, wow. Yeah, when the Hydra has nowhere left to go.
Exactly. Something to think about. Until our next deep dive, take care.